Hi, in this video we are going to write a response to an academic task 2 question seen on 7th of January 2017. This question is an advantages versus disadvantages type of question, and it reads, some people believe that it is better for children to begin learning a foreign language at primary school rather than secondary school. Do the advantages of this outweigh the disadvantages? Okay, so of course in our response we're going to dedicate one of our supporting paragraphs to analyzing the advantages of learning or introducing students to a foreign language in primary school, and then we're also going to look at the disadvantages, and throughout we're going to make little comparisons to secondary school to include that in the response as well. Okay, so as you know, we would start the response with an introduction paragraph, and of course we want to outline a sort of plan for the essay. We want to bring up the topics of introducing a foreign language to students, both at the primary and secondary school levels, and we want to declare to the reader that we will be looking at the advantages and disadvantages of this issue. So we might start with some background, so perhaps something like foreign language studies are a typical component of curriculums the world over. However, and then we want to get into, that this is sort of a discussion because, on the one hand, some people might argue that foreign languages are better introduced at the primary level. On the other hand, people would support introducing them at the secondary level. So the exact age, let's say, at which students should first be introduced to a second language is often debated. Okay. Okay, so now let's include the idea of primary versus secondary schools. So whether first taught at primary school or secondary school, we could say advantages and disadvantages can be identified. Okay, so I'm just going to read through this really quickly. So foreign language studies are a typical component of curriculums the world over. However, the exact age at which students should first be introduced to a second language is often debated. Okay, so just in those first two sentences, we're kind of setting up the fact that this is going to be a bit of a discussion, so that there are kind of like two sides that we're looking at in this essay. Whether first taught at primary school or secondary school, advantages and disadvantages can be identified. So now just a bit of a declaration for how we're going to, what we're going to do in the remainder of the essay. So this essay will analyze, let's just say these items, in an effort to prove one age group better than the other to begin, or the other, let me say, at which to begin foreign language studies. Okay, so we're not really declaring a position. Of course, we're just sort of saying that we're going to look at the advantages versus disadvantages of studying foreign language in primary school versus secondary school before we come to some sort of conclusion on the topic. Okay, so then of course the first supporting paragraph would be looking at the advantages of introducing students at the primary school level to a foreign language. And before I started the video, of course, I kind of had to think about this. And I already, in my mind, I know I'm going to conclude this essay by saying that there are more advantages at the primary level, because I think that that's an easier response to write. I mean, we could make some very easy arguments right off the bat that young people are more capable of acquiring accent, and then I could make some reference to some scientific study, I guess. I mean, as we were talking about in the last video, it's okay to kind of make up examples, so long as they are believable. So that's obviously a very easy point to make. I might say something like young people are usually better able to remember new vocabulary. When I say that, I mean very young people, so at the primary school level versus at the secondary school level, where maybe their memories and their forms of speaking have already been kind of hammered out. So at that point, when they're a bit older and you're trying to introduce a foreign language, it might not be the most effective time to be teaching a foreign language. So I'm going to make that as kind of my solid sort of core argument, and then I'm going to base my conclusion on that. Now, just because it is an advantage and disadvantage sort of essay question, I'm also going to look at the disadvantages, but then I'm going to disprove that, or just downplay the disadvantages a little bit, so that I can finish with a clear conclusion that there is, in fact, more advantages to teaching a foreign language to primary school students than disadvantages. Okay, so the disadvantages would be that I'm going to make the argument that perhaps when you introduce foreign language teaching to very young people, to young children, in some cases it could interfere with their culture. I think that that's a fair argument to make, depending on how heavily the foreign language and the presence of maybe some sort of foreign education body in the education system is. It might encroach upon some of the cultural items that the kids would be picking up in their own school. Okay, so but anyways, I'm gonna, as I said, I'm gonna downplay this, that after I make the argument, and kind of just say that this is not really a valid argument, and that there are indeed more advantages than disadvantages. Okay, so I hope that's not too confusing. You'll see my thought process as we kind of work through the rest of the essay. So as I was saying, we're going to work through the advantages first. So of course, we kind of want to declare in the first sentence that that's what we're going to do in this paragraph. So firstly, introducing a new language to primary school students has several advantages. A very canned, opening sentence. And you might even want to say has several advantages over delaying, let's say, this introduction to secondary school. So for one, and then I'm going to sort of make reference to scientific study, whether these scientific studies exist or not, but as evidenced in numerous scientific studies, young minds are much more capable of acquiring accent, let's say. Okay. And we might even tack on something like a truth that enables young people to reproduce language at a quality comparable to that of a native speaker. I'm just going to read through that, make sure there are no grammatical errors. So our declaration of the topic of this paragraph: firstly, introducing new language to primary school students has several advantages over delaying this introduction to secondary school. For one, as evidenced in numerous scientific studies, young minds are much more capable of acquiring accent, a truth that enables young people to reproduce language at a quality comparable, or that is comparable to that of a native speaker. Okay. Okay, and then we might want to share an additional point about just that, very young children tend to have very strong memories. And actually, I was reading about very early education, and the fact that young kids can learn 10 or more new vocabulary words in a day, which I mean, I'm sure that is possible at secondary level, but I don't think it's quite as innate or as natural as it happens at the primary level. So I might make some kind of loose reference to that as well. So let's just connect these 2 points by saying, in addition to this, let's say the heightened memories or memorizing capabilities, let's say the heightened memories of young people, of young children, make them much more capable of taking on the task. On the task of learning the massive amounts of, say, vocabulary. You know, when you're learning a new language, one of the first basic things you need to do is intake a lot of new vocabulary so that you can operate in the language. So the task of learning the massive amounts of vocabulary needed to be communicative in a second language. And then we'll just say that this, of course, accelerates their, this, of course, accelerates their studies or their second language studies in, I just want to compare it to the alternative of secondary. So in ways not apparent, we could say, or not seen at the secondary level, secondary school level. Okay. So this, of course, accelerates their second language studies in ways not seen at the secondary school level. So, you know, we're tying it into the fact that this is indeed an advantage that is specific to the primary school level. Okay. So now that we've shown a couple of points in support of the advantages of introducing a second language at the primary school level, let's close this paragraph and then open up our disadvantages paragraph. So it is thus clear that teaching a second language at the it's not too much repetition at primary school, but at the primary school level, let's just say at primary school, has certain undeniable advantages or benefits. Just to vary the language a little bit. Okay, and so now as you see, this final sentence, it does not commit my opinion as the writer to anything, really. I mean, it's still a very open discussion. So we're just saying that, yeah, there are very clear advantages, you know, to this school of thought. And then now we're going to go and look at the disadvantages. And so the discussion stays open, really, okay, so, because it is a discussion essay. And we're going to, at the very end of the essay, you know, after this discussion has taken place, choose a position and state that to the reader. So now let's switch it over and look at the disadvantages of introducing language at the primary school level. So despite these advantages, there are concerns, or maybe potential drawbacks to introducing a foreign language at the primary school level. Okay. Okay. Now I'm choosing my words carefully here, so I'm using potential because by the end of this paragraph I actually want to sort of start to bring the essay towards my opinion, which is that there are indeed more advantages to teaching at the primary school level, teaching language at the primary school level. So I'm going to keep it as kind of like potential drawbacks, and then towards the end of the essay word it as in, yeah, these are possible drawbacks, but they're not strong enough drawbacks that they outweigh the advantages that come from introducing very young people to a second language. Okay, and then as you see, I'm trying as much as I can to also link as much of the essay question in the language that I'm using in the essay, so that the examiner is very clear on how I'm connecting this essay to what the essay question is asking, and of course this will win marks for overall task achievement. So, okay, so I want to talk about the subject of cultural erosion, or the possibility of cultural erosion. So if the language component of the curriculum is not sensitive, we'll say, to local customs and traditions, it could interfere with a young learner's understanding of their own culture. Okay, so if the language component of the curriculum is not sensitive to local customs and traditions, it could interfere with a young learner's understanding of their own culture. And then I might just stick on here as well a connection to the secondary. So we might say something like a challenge that is not apparent at, or let's see, among among secondary students, let's say. Okay. So, I mean, we're making it clear that, as we did in the advantages paragraph, that this is a disadvantage that is specific to the primary level. And that helps us to kind of whittle this down into a very specific conclusion that responds to the essay question. So if the language component of the curriculum is not sensitive to local customs and traditions, it could interfere with a local learner's understanding of their own culture, a challenge that is not apparent among secondary students. Okay, so now I want to start to kind of dispel this argument a little bit. I mean, the essay is supposed to be a discussion, so I can do that without stepping on my own toes, because I haven't really shared my opinion. It's more the opinions of others, or just a variety of opinions that I'm looking at in this essay. So an idea might be to bring up the fact that governments usually are on top of this, and they do control, how much exposure, or what kind of exposure, or what materials make their ways into classrooms, and whether this is threatening to the sense of national identity or cultural identity. So we can bring in that a little bit into this, and to say that there are systems in place to make sure that that language learning at the primary level is not something that would cause cultural erosion. Okay. So let's use a transition word. However, although, let's just point out that this is a good point, but it's not as strong as the arguments we brought up in the advantages paragraph. So although this is a concern that should be taken seriously, educational bodies within the country have power to vet, or review and vet, content. And this is practice that curbs the possibility of cultural erosion. let's see here. So, however, although this is a concern that should be taken seriously, education bodies within the country have the power to review and vet content. This is a practice that curbs the possibility of cultural erosion. Let's even stick in here, it should be remembered that. So, however, although this is a concern that should be taken seriously, it should be remembered that. Oh, actually, I just don't want to. I think the repetition of should is kind of awkward, so I'm going to take that out again. Educational bodies within a country have the power to review and vet content. This is a practice that curbs the possibility of cultural erosion. Okay, and then we can actually just turn this around and say that delaying the introduction of a second language to when students are in secondary school and in their teenage years, this misses the opportunity to expose them to other cultures, other ways of thinking about ideas, because sometimes the structure of a language sort of places emphasis on certain things in different ways. So maybe we could go that route and say, further delaying the introduction of foreign language studies also delays a student's development. We could say as a worldly person, or as a culturally a person that understands other cultures. Stick with worldly. As a worldly person that it's not worldly person that understands cultures outside their own. Thus, after analysis, so I'm just going to trying to conclude this now by saying, the disadvantages to foreign language studies in primary school are not quite as threatening or as discouraging as they may at first seem. Okay, let's just read that again. Let's take it from the top here. So, despite these advantages, there are potential drawbacks to introducing a foreign language at the primary school level. If the language component of the curriculum is not sensitive to local customs and traditions, it could interfere with a young learner's understanding of their own culture, a challenge that is not apparent among secondary students. However, although this is a concern that should be taken seriously, educational bodies within a country have the power to review and vet content. This is a practice that curbs the possibility of cultural erosion. Further, delaying the introduction of foreign language studies also delays a student's development as a worldly person that understands cultures outside their own. Thus, after analysis, the disadvantages of foreign language studies in primary school are not quite as discouraging as made for foreign language studies. Yep, choose, okay. So thus, after analysis, the disadvantages to foreign language studies in primary school are not quite as discouraging as they may at first seem. Now, so this is a section where we actually are starting to form a clear opinion on what we've been discussing in this essay. So when the reader sees this, they get the feeling that, okay, well, this writer does indeed feel that the disadvantages are less than the advantages, and in reading this, they can, pretty much predict what we're going to say in the conclusion paragraph. Okay, which we will start now. So we've looked at the advantages of introducing a foreign language in primary school. We've looked at the disadvantages, and then we've included a little bit of comparison to kind of ensure that we're being specific about this is, focusing on primary, not secondary. So we can draw a very clear conclusion now. The above discussion makes clear that I want to stick in despite certain disadvantages. Okay, maybe we'll say despite select disadvantages, language learning is much more effectively executed at primary school than secondary school. So take out much here, such as more effectively executed at primary school than secondary school. The above discussion makes clear that, despite select disadvantages, language learning is more effectively executed at primary school than secondary school. Okay, so this is the declaration of our position, and as you know in the discussion essay, this typically, it doesn't always have to, but typically comes at the end of the essay after the discussion has taken place. But as I was telling you though, it's something that you want to kind of have an idea of before you start writing, because otherwise then, you know, if you're not quite sure and you're kind of exploring the topics in your writing as you're working your way through it, there may be some inconsistencies to the writing. So you might share several advantages, and then you share one disadvantage, and then you conclude that the disadvantages sort of outweigh the advantages. But it might be kind of clear in stream of thought as you're writing it, but when a reader goes back and reads through it, it might not feel that way. I mean, when somebody reads my two supporting paragraphs here, it's very clear to them that, you know, me as the writer feel the advantages are stronger, and that matches the conclusion paragraph here. So it helps contribute to the overall sense of cohesion between all areas of the essay. So I'm going to finish with a bit of a recommendation. So I thus hope, and then just some stock governments the world over, encourage or maybe encourage the introduction of foreign language studies, introduction language classes among their young learners, we'll say. Okay. So the above discussion makes clear that despite select disadvantages, and please notice the commas here, language learning is more effectively executed at primary school than secondary school. I thus hope governments the world over encourage the introduction of foreign language classes among their young learners. Okay, so let's go back up to the top and read through it, and you'll notice that different parts of the essay work to keep it all sort of united and in connection with the essay question. So the essay question reads, some people believe that it is better for children to begin learning a foreign language at primary school rather than secondary school. Do the advantages of this outweigh the disadvantages? Okay. Foreign language studies are a typical component of curriculums the world over. However, the exact age at which students should first be introduced to a second language is often debated. Whether first taught at primary school or secondary school, advantages and disadvantages can be identified. This essay will analyze these items in an effort to prove one age group better than the other at which to begin foreign language studies. Okay. And there are a couple of key things we need to remember, because the essay question uses the word begin, right? So that's key. I mean, at several points you'll see things like introduce and then, you know, begin, just with reference to the essay question, to make sure that our idea is exactly a reflection of what the essay question is asking. Firstly, introducing a new language to primary school students has several advantages over delaying this introduction to secondary school. For one, as evidenced in numerous scientific studies, young minds are much more capable of acquiring accent, a truth that enables young people to reproduce language at a quality comparable to that of a native speaker. In addition to this, the heightened memories of young children make them much more capable of taking on the task of learning the massive amounts of vocabulary needed to be communicative in a second language. This, of course, accelerates their second language studies in ways not seen at the secondary school level. It is thus clear that teaching a second language at primary school has certain undeniable benefits. Okay? Despite these advantages, there are potential drawbacks to introducing a foreign language at the primary school level. If the language component of the curriculum is not sensitive to local customs and traditions, it could interfere with a young learner's understanding of their own culture, a challenge that is not apparent among secondary students. I want to stick in the word mature here. The more mature, okay, let's say it like that. Okay, just to kind of further explain, well, why does this not interfere so much with secondary students? So maybe just because they have more maturity. Okay, and then in the examination room, if you're doing a read-through and you wanted to put that in, like I've just done, you're fine to just put a little arrow or whatever you need to do. The examiner will sort of string it together as long as you're organized about it. However, although this is a concern that should be taken seriously, educational bodies within a country have the power to review and vet content. This is a practice that curbs the possibility of cultural erosion. Further, delaying the introduction of foreign language studies also delays a student's development as a worldly person that understands cultures outside of their own. So actually, this is, we're kind of leading into another advantage, and we can do this because we have used this transitional word, however. Thus, after analysis, the disadvantages to foreign language studies in primary school are not quite as discouraging as they may at first seem. The above discussion makes clear that, despite select disadvantages, language learning is more effectively executed at primary school than secondary school. I thus hope governments the world over encourage the introduction of foreign language classes among their young learners. Okay, governments is fine. I mean, we could be a bit more specific and say, educational ministries or whatever. But so anyways, I hope you noticed how the different parts of this essay work together, how we look at both the advantages and the disadvantages, but we do definitely narrow things down and declare a position, a very clear position here at the end. That is a direct reflection of what is asked in the essay question, okay? Okay, so I think that's about it. I hope that was a helpful demonstration for you. If you appreciate the video, please leave a like, and I will be pulling together an academic task 1 response in the next few days because somebody has emailed me that. Please keep emailing me the questions that you see on the exam so I can pull these tutorials together, because I can't do it unless you send me the questions and I know what you've been faced with on the exam itself. Okay, so my email is ryan@IELTS.com. And you can catch me there, or you can get me at IELTSnetwork.com. So thanks very much, and we'll see you next video.